Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. In Ottawa in winter, the first snowfall crept in. Elliott Thorne stood in front of his two-story cottage in the Gloucester neighborhood and watched as snow covered the front lawn. His breath formed a white mist in the cold air, and in his right hand, he held the special delivery mail he'd just received. The Evans Bridge project he was responsible for had finally received final approval from the city. This should have been a time for celebration. A veteran structural engineer, Elliott has been preparing for this multi-million-dollar bridge rehabilitation project for nearly 6 months. The success of this project would mean a major milestone in his career, and the firm would likely consider promoting him to senior partner. However, when he turned to face his home, an uncanny sense of emptiness took over. Another project that requires long hours, Elliott whispered to himself, slung his briefcase over his shoulder, and stepped toward the front door. Pushing open the door, the warmth of his home immediately surrounded him. The air was filled with the scent of cinnamon and apple from Naomi's latest obsession, scented candles. In the living room, his wife was intently drawing something on her tablet, likely a new piece for her online art store. "I'm back," Elliott said softly, taking off his jacket and hanging it on the coat rack on the porch. Naomi looked up, her blue eyes meeting his briefly before returning to the screen. "Hey, dinner is keeping warm in the oven. Trevor went to a friend's house and said he'd be back by 9. Megan is upstairs doing her homework." After 17 years of marriage, communication between them had become so brief and practical. Elliott remembers a time when Naomi would jump up and give him a hug when he came home, eagerly inquiring about his day. Now, their interactions are more like roommates than couples. Elliott walks to the kitchen and takes out his dinner, a plate of roasted chicken with vegetables. The food was delicious, but it couldn't fill the hole deep inside him. He and Naomi hadn't had a real conversation in months, the kind where they could make each other feel understood and appreciated. After dinner, Elliott is in his study working on papers for tomorrow's meeting. Naomi continues her artistic endeavors in her downstairs studio. Their daughter Megan was in her room, the sound of soft music coming from her headphones. They look like an ordinary middle-class Canadian family, each busy but living in harmony. But Elliott knows that this harmony is only superficial. For the past few years, whenever he's tried to go deeper with Naomi and talk about their relationship, the conversation has always ended with Naomi changing the subject or excusing herself as busy. At first, Elliott blamed his projects for taking up too much of his time, but even on the days he purposely made time for his family, that sense of detachment remained. At 10 p.m., as Elliott was getting ready for bed, he noticed Naomi in the master bathroom, freshening up. She was wearing a new nightgown dress, and the faint scent of perfume filled the air. "New pajamas?" he inquired, trying to find something to talk about. "Well, I bought it last week," Naomi replied briefly, continuing to focus on herself in the mirror. Elliott sighed and got under the covers. He was too tired to try to break down the invisible wall again. Maybe tomorrow will be better, he thought. Maybe he should have a surprise for Naomi to rekindle the spark between them. Just as he was almost asleep, Naomi's cell phone lit up. She quickly grabbed her cell phone, an expression Elliott couldn't decipher flashing across her face, before walking out of the bedroom to reply to the message. This wasn't the first time, Elliott noted. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Elliott stood in the kitchen of their home, looking at the renovation plans Naomi had displayed. "Elliott, we discussed this. The kitchen hadn't been updated in 10 years, and the cabinets were starting to peel. Not to mention, Naomi's eyes twinkled with excitement. It will give me the perfect backdrop for my video creations. Do you know how many artists are now showing their working environment on social media?" Elliott knows that Naomi's small art store has had some success over the past 2 years, and she's recently started sharing the creative process on Instagram and TikTok, which has brought her a lot of attention. "Okay, but the budget is a problem. The Evans Bridge project, while important, is a big upfront investment. I found a very talented and reasonably priced contractor," Naomi said as she handed him a business card, Caleb Delaney, who did the Morrisons' kitchen with amazing results. "And he agreed we could pay in installments." Elliott studied the business card. Delaney Home Renovations, professionalism, efficiency, and satisfaction guaranteed. He wasn't sure what it was that made him uneasy, perhaps his natural caution, perhaps the unusual eagerness in Naomi's eyes. "It can be arranged for him to come and see it," he finally agreed. "But I'll be present." 2 days later, Caleb Delaney stood in their kitchen talking about cabinet styles and countertop materials. He was a few inches shorter than Elliott, but well-built, with dark brown hair that was slightly curly and always had a confident smile on his face. Elliott noticed Naomi smiling more cheerfully than usual as Caleb explained the design concept. "Mr. Thorne, do you have any special requests for the kitchen?" Caleb asked, eyeing Elliott directly. "Functionality comes first," Elliott replied. "I don't need anything fancy, just practical and durable." "Of course," Caleb nodded. "But I'm sure we can find solutions that are both aesthetically pleasing and practical for both you and your wife." Eventually, they finalized a mid-range renovation plan with about 3 weeks of work. Elliott must admit that Caleb is truly professional and knowledgeable, and his offer was 15% below the market average. "Construction can begin next week," Caleb said before leaving, "and I'll be personally overseeing the process to make sure everything goes smoothly." Naomi looked unusually excited as Caleb's truck pulled out of their driveway. "This is great. It's finally time to have a decent kitchen." Elliott smiled at her enthusiasm and inwardly hoped that the program would bring some positive change to their family. The first week after the kitchen renovation began, Elliott was occupied most of the time by the Evans Bridge project. The day starts early and ends late, sometimes even needing to be on site on weekends to solve problems. He noticed that Naomi didn't seem to mind that he was busy, which was a stark contrast to her past attitude of complaining that he worked too much. Elliott comes home early one evening to find Caleb and Naomi sitting at the dining room table with designs and samples spread out in front of them. Laughter came from the kitchen, warm and intimate. The atmosphere between the two changed subtly when Elliott walked through the door. "Elliott, you're home early today," Naomi said with a hint of surprise in her voice. "Caleb was showing me some new lighting options." "I hope I'm not interrupting, Mr. Thorne." Caleb stood up and held out his hand. "We found out that the chandelier that was planned might not arrive on time, so I brought some alternatives." Elliott shook Caleb's hand, feeling a little uncomfortable. "It's okay, you guys go ahead. I'll go upstairs and change first." Later that night, Elliott tries to talk to Naomi about the progress of the renovation, but she seems distracted. "Caleb says everything is going according to plan," she replied briefly. "He's really experienced and knows how to deal with problems." As the renovation proceeds, Elliott notices that Naomi begins to pay more attention to her appearance. She got a new haircut, bought new clothes, and even started using makeup that she never used before. When he inquired about the changes, she simply said she wanted a fresh look to go with her new kitchen. The next week, Elliott was called to the job site urgently to deal with a structural problem and had to temporarily cancel his and Naomi's long-planned anniversary dinner. "I'm sorry, I know it's important," he apologized over the phone. "It's okay." Naomi's voice was surprisingly calm. "I understand. We can celebrate another day." A sense of unease crept into Elliott's mind as he hung up the phone. For the first time in 17 years, this was the first time they had missed an anniversary. Even stranger was Naomi's reaction. No disappointment, no complaints, just unnatural understanding. "Geez, I forgot it was your anniversary," said Elliott's coworker Pat at the job site. "You should have told me, and we could have dealt with this tomorrow." "No, this is too important." Elliott shook his head. "Naomi understands." "Are you sure?" Pat raised an eyebrow. "My wife would have thrown my stuff in the yard." Elliott smiled, but the feeling of unease grew within him. When he finally got home at 1 a.m., the house was dark. Wine glasses and empty bottles in the living room hint that Naomi is not spending the night alone. The next day, when he asks Naomi who she spent the night with, she mentions her best friend Leanne. "We had some drinks and watched a movie. Much better than sitting at home alone." Elliott nodded, not pursuing the question. Maybe he's thinking too much. After all, Naomi and Leanne have really been friends for years. "Dad, can you help me see what's wrong with this program?" Trevor slumped in the doorway of the study, laptop in hand. Elliott was reviewing the latest report on the Evans Bridge project, but he immediately put the document aside. "Sure, come on over." At 16, Trevor has already begun to show a talent for programming, and Elliott is proud of his son's interest. Although he knew very little about programming himself, he always did his best to support Trevor's hobbies. The loop is supposed to be infinite, but it always stops after the 10th iteration, Trevor explains, pointing to the code on the screen. Elliott studied the lines of code. even though he didn't fully understand the logic. Maybe this variable is reset after each loop, he asked tentatively. Trevor narrowed his eyes and stared at the screen before realization dawned on him. You're right. I defined the variable outside the loop, but redefined it inside. Thanks, Dad. Elliott smiled as he watched his son modify the code. It was one of the few intimate moments between them. Trevor is in his teenage years and spends most of his time immersed in his own world, rarely initiating communication with his parents. Mom's looking different lately, Trevor said suddenly, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Elliott felt a pang of nervousness. What do you mean? I don't know. Trevor shrugged. She smiles more, is always messaging, and has started wearing clothes that I've never seen before. Maybe it's because her art career has been going so well lately, Elliott said, trying to offer a plausible explanation while appeasing his own inner skeptic. Maybe, Trevor said noncommittally, but she acted especially different when Caleb was here. Elliott felt a wave of vertigo. Caleb, the decorator. Every time he comes, Mom becomes extra happy and nervous, just like Megan when she sees a boy she likes. Elliott forced himself to stay calm. Teenagers always notice things that adults miss, he mused, rubbing Trevor's hair. Don't think too much and focus on your code. Later that night, Elliott tries to observe Naomi's interactions with Caleb. Caleb had come to deliver some newly arrived material, and when he entered, Naomi's whole demeanor changed. Her voice rose an octave. Her gestures were more animated, and there was a gleam in her eye that Elliott hadn't seen in a long time. These tiles are even more beautiful than I imagined, Naomi marveled, running her fingers over the samples. You have a great eye, Caleb. Just want to make sure the end result is worthy of the home and your art, Caleb responds, his eyes lingering on Naomi much longer than is professionally necessary. Elliott stood by, feeling like an outsider. He cleared his throat, and Caleb turned to him then. Mr. Thorne, how was your day at the office? It's okay, Elliott replied briefly. How's the construction coming along? It went very well. In fact, we may finish a few days earlier than expected, Caleb says confidently. Tomorrow we'll install the new island counter, and the day after that we'll start laying tile. Sounds good. Elliott nodded, noting the brightness in Naomi's eyes as Caleb spoke. When Caleb leaves, Elliott tries to talk to Naomi about their relationship. We haven't really communicated in a while, he said, opening the door, and I feel like we're a little distant from each other. Naomi looked a little surprised, but quickly adjusted her expression. We're all busy, Elliott. You have your bridge project, I have my art, and this renovation. We'll have more time when the dust settles. I don't want to wait, Elliott insisted. I want to fix things now. There's no problem to solve. Naomi's voice held a hint of impatience. You always like to complicate things. We're fine, really. Elliott tried to follow up, but Naomi had already turned away, ending the conversation. He stood still, feeling more alone than ever. Near the end of the renovation, Elliott was notified by the company. There were some issues with the Evans Bridge project that required him to travel to the site for 2 weeks of intensive work. This means he'll miss the finalization of the kitchen, and it also means Naomi and Caleb will have more alone time. I can postpone the trip, Elliott said to Naomi, at least until the kitchen is finished. Don't be silly. Naomi shook her head. This program is important to you. I can handle things here. Elliott hesitated, but ultimately decided to honor Naomi's decision. Maybe this separation will give them some food for thought and allow them to reevaluate their relationship. The night before he left, Elliott walked by Megan's room and heard her talking to a friend. Mom's been super weird lately. Megan's voice came through the half-open door. She's always staring at her phone, and every time that decorator comes over, she acts like a completely different person. Elliott stopped and held his breath. I don't know, Megan continued. I came home early last week and saw them standing super close in the kitchen and jumped away as soon as they saw me. It's so embarrassing. Elliott felt a wave of vertigo and held onto the wall to steady himself. He wanted to storm into the room and question Megan for more details, but reason told him that would only scare his daughter. Instead, he left quietly, suspicion spreading like wildfire in his mind. That night, while Naomi is in the shower, Elliott is in a moral dilemma. He has never looked through his wife's cell phone, and respect for privacy is one of the cornerstones of their marriage. But now, all signs pointed to a possibility he didn't want to face. In the end, Respect and trust overcame skepticism. Instead of checking Naomi's cell phone, he decides to reevaluate their relationship during his business trip and have an honest conversation with Naomi upon his return. Elliott's first week on business went unusually slow. The Evans Bridge project faced a series of technical challenges that required his full attention. But even in the most stressful meetings, his thoughts drifted unconsciously back home. What was Naomi doing? Does Caleb still work there? He called home every day, but the exchanges were always brief and superficial. Naomi would tell him about the progress of the renovations, how the kids were doing, but never went into depth about their feelings or thoughts. The following Wednesday, Elliott had a technical problem at the job site that left his cell phone without power. Anxious, he had to borrow a colleague's cell phone to send a message to the children to let them know he would be in touch later. Trevor would have seen the message the fastest, Elliott thought, deciding to send his son a private message via Instagram since he knew Trevor always carried his cell phone with him. Upon logging into Instagram, Elliott noticed that Trevor had a lot of unread notifications, most of them from a private group called Family Eyes. Out of curiosity, he clicked on the group. There are only 2 members of the group, Trevor and Megan. Elliott was going to exit immediately, respecting the children's privacy, but the latest news on the screen stopped him in his tracks. Mom's boyfriend is actually staying with us, Megan's message reads. And I found him wearing Dad's underwear today. It's disgusting. Elliott felt a wave of nausea, but he couldn't stop reading. He stayed over again last night, Trevor replied. I heard them laughing in the master bedroom. Mom thought we were all asleep. I'm hoping Dad will be traveling again for Christmas, Megan wrote. So Caleb can come and we can celebrate together. The last gift he brought was fantastic. Elliott's hands were so shaky, he could barely hold the phone. He swiped upward for earlier news. The conversation confirmed his worst suspicions. Naomi and Caleb had been dating during his business trips, and apparently, the relationship had grown quite intimate. What breaks his heart even more is that the kids seem to have come to terms with this reality and are even beginning to look forward to spending time with Caleb. Are you okay? Pat, a coworker, came up to me and asked, You look terrible. I have to go home, Elliott said in a hoarse voice. And I have to go home now. He didn't tell anyone the real reason, just that there was a family emergency. An hour later, Elliott was on a plane back to Ottawa, filled with anger, a sense of betrayal and deep sadness. After the plane took off, he began to think about his next move. Rushing straight home to confront Naomi? Gathering more evidence? He needs a plan, one that protects his and his children's rights. By the time the plane landed in Ottawa, Elliott had already made his decision. Instead of letting his anger cloud his judgment, he will take a calmer, more calculated response. Instead of going home immediately, Elliott checked into a downtown hotel. He needs time to think and space to make a plan. The first step is to validate what the kids are saying in the group chat. He dialed Trevor's number and pretended it was just a routine greeting. Is everything okay? He tried to sound as normal as possible. It's okay, Trevor replied. How's your project coming along? There have been some challenges, Elliott said vaguely before changing the subject. Where's Mom? Is she home? No, she and Caleb went out, Trevor replied without hesitation. They said they were going to pick out some final touches for the kitchen, but Megan thinks they just wanted to be alone. Elliott's heart sank. How are you guys getting along with Caleb? He's not bad. Trevor's voice was a little uncertain. Brings us cool stuff. Helps me fix my computer. It's still kind of weird though, seeing him with Mom. Elliott held back his emotions. Strange. How? It's intimate. Trevor hesitated. Sometimes they think we're not paying attention and they'll cuddle or kiss. I think it's good for Mom. She's been smiling more lately, but it's not quite fair to you. Elliott felt a pang of heartache, but at the same time warmed by his son's honesty and thoughtfulness. Thanks for letting me know, Trevor. I'll be home soon. After hanging up, Elliott contacted a reputable private investigator and an attorney who specialized in divorce cases. He needs to gather evidence, know his rights, and prepare for the coming storm. Attorney Diane Matthews saw him early the next morning. In Canada, the betrayal itself won't have a direct impact on property division, she explains. But if you can prove that she misappropriated family funds to support the relationship, that's a different matter. What about the kids? Elliott asked, and that was his main concern. The court will consider the best interests of the child, Diane said. And given their age, The judge will likely honor their wishes. But you need to be careful how you proceed and not get the children involved in disputes between adults. Elliott nods and begins to detail his findings and suspicions. Over the next few days, private investigators confirmed Naomi and Caleb's relationship, taking photos of them going in and out of restaurants and hotels together, and even documenting evidence of Caleb's multiple overnight stays at Elliott's home. Most shocking to Elliott, the detective also discovers that Caleb has a shady history. He has developed relationships with clients on several occasions, several of whom are also married women. Worse still, some of his renovation works have serious quality problems and have been the subject of numerous complaints by the Consumer Protection Bureau. This isn't just a family tragedy, Elliott realizes. It's about integrity and responsibility. After confirming enough evidence, Elliott began the next step, reorganizing the family's finances. He consulted a financial advisor to find out how to legally protect assets, especially funds set aside for his children's college education. We can set up a special education trust fund, the advisor suggested, so that even after the divorce, the money can only be used for the children's education. Elliott agreed to the program and got started immediately. He also contacted a moving company to arrange for service on a specific date. 10 days later, all preparations were in place. Elliott decides it's time to go home, time to face the reality that has changed his life. As Elliott's cab pulls into the driveway in front of the house, a familiar truck is leaving in the opposite direction Caleb's truck. Elliott resisted the urge to rush up there and told the driver to stop at the corner. He needed to be calm and he needed to stick to the plan. The house looks the same as when he left, but it feels completely different. He stood in the doorway, took a deep breath, and opened the front door with his key. The living room was empty, but the sound of Naomi humming came from the kitchen. The newly remodeled kitchen shines with modernity, sleek marble countertops, dark wood cabinets, gleaming stainless steel appliances. What should have been a source of pride for their family was now just evidence of betrayal. "Elliott," Naomi exclaimed when she saw him, her eyes wide. "What are you doing back here? I thought you weren't due back for another week." "The project is ahead of schedule," Elliott said calmly, "and the new kitchen looks great." Naomi's expression shifted from surprise to alarm. "Why didn't you call to say you were coming back?" "Maybe because I wanted to surprise you." Elliott's tone was icy, like the one you gave me. Naomi's face changed. "What are you talking about?" "Caleb," Elliott said simply. "And your relationship." There was an awkward silence. Naomi opened her mouth as if to deny it, but seeing the determination in Elliott's eyes, she changed her mind. "I didn't mean to," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "It just happened. I feel alone, Elliott. For years, you were always focused on the work, and I needed more." "So you chose betrayal over communication?" Elliott asked, feeling a pang of heartache. "You chose to let my children know that their mother cheated on them and even let them accept that man?" "The kids know," Naomi asked in surprise. "Not only do they know, but they're discussing how they're going to celebrate Christmas with your boyfriend and hoping I'll be able to travel again." Elliott's voice trembled with pain. "Do you have any ideas, Naomi?" Naomi was speechless, her eyes filled with mixed emotions, shame, remorse, but strangely, not much regret. "Caleb understands me," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "He makes me feel alive and appreciated. There's been no real marriage between us for a long time, Elliott. We're just two strangers living under the same roof." Elliott felt a strange calmness as he listened to these words. Maybe she was right. Maybe their marriage had been in name only for a long time. But that doesn't justify betrayal, especially betrayal that involves children. "I hope he's worth it," Elliott said finally, turning toward the den. "Because he'll be all you have left." Naomi followed him, confused. "What does that mean?" Elliott didn't answer, just took a thick envelope out of his desk drawer and handed it to her. "Here are the divorce papers. My lawyer has everything ready." Naomi took the envelope in shock, her face pale. "How long have you been planning this?" "From the moment I found out the truth," Elliott replied calmly. "I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about how to respond to this situation. I could have stormed back and made a scene, but that would have only made it worse. Instead, I chose a more calm approach." Just then, the front door opened and Trevor and Megan came home. They were surprised to see their father standing in the center of the living room. "Dad," Megan gleefully ran over and hugged him. You're home early. Trevor, on the other hand, was more cautious, watching his parents' expressions. What happened? He asked keenly. Elliott took a deep breath and looked out the window. A moving truck was slowly pulling into their driveway. Boys, there's something I need to tell you, he said calmly. I know about your mom and Caleb. Both children froze, their eyes scanning back and forth between their parents. I've decided to leave the house, Elliott continued, and I've found a new place to live. Divorce proceedings have also begun. No, Megan exclaimed, tears immediately welling up in her eyes. You can't leave us. Trevor, for his part, remained silent, but his eyes were filled with mixed emotions. I will never leave you, Elliott said firmly, grabbing his daughter by the shoulders. No matter what happens, I am your father. But I can't keep living in this house of lies. Naomi began to cry, but Elliott noticed that her tears were more out of shock and fear than regret. You can't do this, she drawled. We can talk and find a solution. As in, you chose to talk to me about your grievances instead of seeking comfort with Caleb? Elliott asked rhetorically, then turned to the kids. There's one more thing you need to know. I had to reorganize our finances to pay for legal fees and living expenses. This means that the funds we have set aside for your university are temporarily unavailable. What do you mean? Trevor asked, frowning. This means that if things continue to go this way, I may not be able to pay for your college tuition, Elliott said bitterly. I'm sorry, but that's the reality. The room was silent, except for Naomi's intermittent sobs. The movers knocked on the front door, and Elliott nodded for them to get to work. You can choose to live with me or stay here, Elliott told the children, and I respect your decision. But remember, no matter what you choose, I will always love you. As the movers began to move Elliott's personal belongings, reality finally hit everyone. Naomi sits on the couch, divorce papers clutched in her hands, her eyes vacant. Trevor stood by the window, his expression inscrutable. Megan clung to Elliott with tears streaming down her face. That night, Elliott checked into the apartment he had rented, alone. It breaks his heart that the children have chosen to stay home for now, but he understands that they will need time to adjust to this drastic change. Lying on the unfamiliar bed, Elliott contemplated the events of the past few weeks. Did he make the right decision? Will the thrill of revenge outweigh the pain of losing your family? He doesn't know. But one thing is certain, his life, and the lives of all involved, will never be the same again. Ottawa's winter grew colder as the first heavy snowfall covered the city, bringing a brief moment of calm to a bruised world. Elliott stood at the window of his downtown apartment and watched the snowflakes shimmer as the streetlights illuminated them. 3 weeks have passed, and the pain of leaving home has not diminished in the least. The apartment is small, with only one bedroom, but Elliott doesn't mind. All he needed was space to think, a haven from memories of betrayal. A picture of Trevor and Megan hangs on the wall, one of the few personal items he took from the house. The phone lit up with a message from Trevor. Megan and I want to come over for a few days. Is that okay? Elliott immediately replied, sure, anytime. Since leaving the house that day, Elliott's relationship with his children has become complicated and delicate. For the first few days, they were angry and confused about his decision, especially about the college fund. But over time, as Naomi began to date Caleb more openly, the kids' attitudes gradually shifted. The ringing phone interrupted Elliott's thoughts. It's attorney Diane. Mr. Thorne, I was contacted by Naomi's attorney. Diane cuts right to the chase, and she has asked for a reconsideration of the property division proposal, specifically the portion regarding child support and college funds. Elliott sighed. Tell her my position hasn't changed. The funds have been deposited into a trust fund and will only be available when the children go to college. She claims your actions were malicious financial planning to try to deprive her of her rightful portion. Diane continues, but the law is on our side. The financial arrangements you made after discovering her infidelity were legal, especially given that the funds will still ultimately be used for the children's education. Elliott looked out the window, contemplating the developments. Where's Caleb? Any news of him? Interestingly enough, Diane's voice held a hint of curiosity. He seems to have received multiple customer complaints in the past week. Our investigators found that most of these complaints originated from the same online community as your engineering and construction industry contacts. Elliott did not respond. When he discovered serious quality issues with Caleb's work, he did reach out to several engineering friends and colleagues, but only to share the facts, not to instigate anything. If people decide to be more cautious about Caleb's services, that's entirely their decision. Anyway, Diane continued, the court has scheduled a preliminary hearing. Until then, I suggest you continue to document all interactions with the children, especially any attempts by Naomi to prevent you from seeing them. After hanging up, Elliott prepared dinner, a simple pasta and salad. He'd learned a lot of life skills in the weeks he'd been living on his own. In the past, most of the housework was handled by Naomi, not because she was a housewife, but because it was a natural division of labor that they had developed years ago. Now he had to learn to take care of all his needs. Just as he was about to eat, the doorbell rang. Trevor and Megan stood outside the door, duffel bags in hand and complex expressions on their faces. Can we come in? Trevor asked, his voice lower than usual. Of course, Elliott said as he sidled up to let the kids in, noting that they were even more tired and frustrated than the last time they'd seen each other. What happened? He asked, taking Megan's backpack. Caleb moved in, Megan said bluntly, her eyes red and swollen, obviously having cried, officially. His stuff now fills your closet and study. Elliott felt a tingle, but tried to control his expression. I understand. Mom says it's moving on. Trevor joins the conversation, with palpable anger in his voice, as if the last 17 years of family life were just a chapter that you could turn the page on at any time. Elliott guided the kids to the living room and sat them down and poured them drinks. How are you guys feeling? He asked cautiously, not wanting to demean their mother in front of the children, no matter what she had done. It sucks, Megan confessed, tears welling up again. Caleb tries to play the cool dad role, taking us to expensive restaurants and buying us gifts. But every time I see him sitting in your seat, drinking coffee from your mug, I want to throw up. Trevor nods in agreement, but his reaction is more restrained. I hacked into his computer, he snapped, avoiding Elliott's surprised gaze. I know it's not right, but I had to find out more about this man who was suddenly part of our family. What did you find out? Elliott asked, struggling internally between concern for his son's behavior and a desire for information. He's done something similar in the past, Trevor whispers, looking for married female clients, giving them special discounts, and then starting to date. There is a folder dedicated to photos and contact information for different families. Elliott felt a wave of nausea. Trevor, you shouldn't intrude on someone's privacy, even for reasons like this. I know, Trevor admitted, but I want to know the truth. To make matters worse, I realized he might be cutting corners. His quotes are so low because the materials he uses are far below the quality he promises his customers. Elliott wasn't surprised. His private investigator has found similar information, but it still gave him a pang to hear those words coming from his son's mouth. These things are complicated, Elliott said eventually, deciding to change the subject. Do you guys want something to eat? I just made pasta. Caleb always orders takeout, Megan said, and I miss your cooking. Although Mom always said you were a terrible cook, Trevor added jokingly, trying to lighten the mood. Elliott smiled and walked toward the kitchen to reheat the food. You guys can leave your stuff in the guest room. I have everything ready for you. At dinner, they talked about school, friends, and future plans, deliberately avoiding the heavy topic of family changes. After the meal, while the kids were busy doing their own thing, Elliott got a text from Naomi. You can't just take the kids. We need to follow formal custody arrangements. Elliott replied, they came by choice. I didn't encourage or force it. They're old enough to decide who they want to spend the weekend with. A few minutes later, the phone rang. Elliott sighed and walked out onto the balcony to answer it. You know what you're doing. Naomi's voice was filled with anger. You're making the children part of your revenge plan. You're the one who lets strangers sleep in their father's place. Elliott responded calmly. I've never spoken ill of you in front of the kids, respecting your role as a mother. And you're undermining me as a father figure. I'm just trying to move on, Naomi argued. Our marriage ended a long time ago. You and I both know that. Caleb makes me happy, and I have the right to pursue my own happiness. Yes, you have that right, Elliott agreed. But the way you chose to do it hurt everyone, especially the kids. You could have ended our marriage and then started a new relationship. There was a silence on the other end of the line. So this is your revenge plan? Naomi finally asked. Take my money, take my kids? I didn't take anything away, Elliott corrected. The funds will still go to the children's education, which is what we always planned. As for the kids, they chose to come here themselves. Maybe you should ask yourself why. After hanging up, Elliott felt a wave of exhaustion. He never thought his marriage would end this way. Never thought he would be the one who had to explain to his children why his family broke up. That night, as he passed the guest room, he heard Megan's soft sobs. He knocked lightly on the door, heard a faint come in, and stepped inside. Megan sat on her bed, clutching an old teddy bear, a gift from Elliott on her 5th birthday. I hate it all, she sobbed. I wish things could go back to the way they were. Elliott sat on the edge of the bed and gently patted his daughter's back. Me too, sweetheart. But sometimes things change, and we have to learn to adapt. Why is Mommy doing this? Megan asked, confusion in her eyes. Doesn't she love you anymore? Elliott pondered how to answer the question. He wants to protect Naomi's image in his child's mind, but at the same time, he doesn't want to lie to his daughter. Sometimes love changes, he said eventually. And people change. Something happened between Mom and I that made it impossible for us to stay together. But that doesn't mean we don't love you. You and Trevor will always be the most important people to us. Megan leaned on her father's shoulder as the tears gradually stopped. Trevor and I know more than you think, she whispered. And we're not stupid. We see the way Mom changes and how she focuses on herself to the exclusion of her family. Elliott is heartbroken, but also proud of his daughter's maturity. Whatever happens, I'll always be here, he promised, kissing her forehead. Now, try to get some sleep. Tomorrow we can make breakfast together like we used to. After walking out of the room, Elliott leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. This situation was more complicated than he thought. The calm, orderly separation he had planned was becoming increasingly chaotic, a maelstrom of emotions threatening to engulf everyone. Elliott was awakened early the next morning by the phone ringing. It was Pat, his colleague on the Evans Bridge project. Man, did you see the news? Pat's voice was full of worry. What's the news? Elliott asked, confused, glancing at the time, 6:30 a.m. Reports on Delaney home renovations. Several customers have come forward alleging that their remodeling work was seriously flawed and even a safety hazard. The one you, ex-wife's boyfriend, right? Elliott was instantly sober. I don't know. I'm not involved in this. Sure, Pat agreed quickly. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Considering your situation, this could affect your divorce case. Elliott hung up hastily and opened his laptop to check the news. Pat wasn't exaggerating. A local news site ran a detailed story describing how Caleb Delaney systematically used substandard materials in remodeling projects while charging clients for high-quality materials. Several former clients provided evidence, including reports from independent inspectors, confirming structural problems with the renovation work on their homes. Even more shocking, the report implies that Caleb had a pattern of inappropriate behavior, including developing personal relationships with several female clients. While the report doesn't mention Naomi directly, the implication is clear enough. Elliott shut down his computer and felt a wave of mixed emotions. He had mentioned Caleb's problems to several of his peers, but never anticipated the coverage. Is this part of his revenge plan? Sort of, but he never thought things would become so public. Trevor and Megan got up, and Elliott decided to talk to them frankly about it. There's been some chatter you may have heard about the news coverage of Caleb, he said over breakfast. And I want you to know that I have not reached out to the media or pushed for this investigation. But you know he's got engineering problems, Trevor pointed out sharply. Yes, Elliott admits. I learned some information and shared those facts with several friends in the industry. But I didn't anticipate things going this far. What about Mom? Concerned, Megan asked. Will this affect her? Elliott hesitated. There may be some repercussions, he said honestly. But your mother is a strong person and she will get through this. Just then, Elliott's cell phone rang again. It's Naomi. Are you satisfied? She questioned as soon as she got through, her voice shaking with anger. You ruined his career and now you're going to ruin his reputation? I'm just sharing the known facts, Elliott responded calmly. If there is indeed a problem with his work, then the client has a right to know. It's not just about his engineering, Naomi exclaimed. That story implies that he specializes in developing relationships with married women. It turned me into a deluded fool. Elliott did not immediately respond. Did Naomi feel cheated? Or was she just worried about her social image? Whatever the answer was, he didn't get the satisfaction from it that he thought he would. "I'm sorry you feel hurt," he said eventually. "But every choice has consequences, Naomi. This is your form of revenge." Her voice lowered with a hint of hurt. "Punish me by destroying everything connected to me?" "No," Elliott said firmly. "I have no interest in destroying anything. I'm just protecting myself and my children. If the truth hurts you and Caleb, it's because of your own behavior, not my revelations." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. "The kids have to go home today," Naomi finally said, her voice regaining its composure. "Or I'll contact my lawyer." Elliott looks over at Trevor and Megan, who are pretending they didn't hear the conversation, but clearly every word went into their ears. "I'll ask them what they want," he replied. "They're old enough to make their own decisions." After hanging up, Elliott turned to the kids. "You heard him. Mommy wants you to come home today." Trevor and Megan exchanged a look. "I don't want to go back," Megan said firmly. "At least not yet." "Is Caleb still there?" "I guess so," Elliott replied. "But this is your home, and you have a right to go back." "It didn't feel like home anymore," Trevor whispered. "It was like a stage play full of lies." Elliott understands how the kids feel, but he also knows it's not fair to trap them in the middle of parental conflict. "Maybe we could find a compromise," he suggested. "Spend today with me and go back tomorrow. That way you guys can have time to think and Mom can calm down." The kids agree to the arrangement, and Elliott sends a message to inform Naomi. She replied briefly, "Okay," without further comment. That day, Elliott took the kids to the National Gallery in Ottawa in an attempt to create some normal, positive memories for them. Watching Trevor and Megan's curiosity and comments about the artwork, Elliott feels a glimmer of hope. Maybe, despite the storm, they'll be okay in the end. The next few weeks turned into an emotional and legal tug-of-war. Naomi hired an aggressive divorce attorney to question Elliott's handling of the property. Elliott stood his ground, but each court hearing exhausted him. The real challenge comes from the children's changing moods and loyalties. Megan began alternating between Elliott's apartment and her home, while Trevor stayed with Elliott most of the time, coming home only when necessary. Not only does this split cause emotional stress for the children, it also complicates daily life. Caleb's situation is more complicated. After the media coverage, his business came to an almost complete standstill. More customers came forward to complain about the quality of his work, and the Consumer Protection Bureau launched a formal investigation. This should have given Elliott a sense of vengeful satisfaction, but in reality, it only left him feeling empty. One night, while Elliott was alone in his apartment, the doorbell rang. To his surprise, standing outside the door was Caleb Delaney. "Can I come in?" Caleb asked, his voice tired and strained. Elliott hesitates, but eventually lets him in. If Caleb wants to talk, maybe this is an opportunity to work something out. "You ruined my business," Caleb said as soon as he walked in the door, both anger and frustration in his voice. "All those complaints, that story, you set it up, didn't you?" Elliott, stay calm. "I didn't schedule anything. I'm just sharing the known facts. If you have a problem with your project, it's your own responsibility." "Don't pretend," Caleb taunted. "I know your plan for revenge. Not only did you take Naomi's money, you tried to destroy everything she loved." "All that is loved?" Elliott questioned. "Does that include her family? Her children? Because those are the ones she betrayed in the first place." Caleb's expression changed slightly. "We didn't plan all this, you know? It just happened. Naomi feels alone and neglected. She needs someone to really see her and appreciate her. So you decided to be the one," Elliott said calmly, "even though you knew she was married with children." "I love her," Caleb claimed. "It's not just a conquest or a game. She's special to me." Elliott remembers the evidence the private investigator found a pattern of Caleb's relationships with other married women. "How special is it?" "As special as the other women in your file." Caleb's face changed. "You investigated me." "Of course," Elliott admitted frankly. "When I found out my wife had betrayed me, I had a right to know with whom." The two were silent for a moment, the air filled with unspoken accusations and defenses. "Look," Caleb said eventually, his tone softening. "We're all adults. We've all made mistakes. But right now, your actions are hurting innocent people. Naomi doesn't eat or sleep. The children are suffering. Even if you hate me, please consider them." Elliott felt a surge of anger. "Don't pretend to care about my children," he said coldly. "Don't pretend you understand what it's like when a family is destroyed. You're the instigator, not the victim." "I'm not here to argue." Caleb held up his hands. "I'm here to propose solutions. Stop this media storm, stop the financial restrictions, and we can work this out like civilized people." Elliott watched as the man who had taken his marriage now stood in his living room talking about civilized solutions. The irony of it all. "What do you want?" Elliott asked directly. "Withdraw your complaint and tell your friends to stop spreading rumors about me." Caleb lists his terms. "And in return, I'll make sure Naomi accepts more reasonable terms for her divorce." Elliott shook his head. "First of all, I didn't file any formal complaints, just shared the facts. Secondly, if someone is spreading rumors, it's because you do have a problem with your project. In the end, Naomi can negotiate with me through her attorney without you acting as a go-between." Caleb's expression turned somber. "Are you really ready to let this war go on? Consider the consequences, Thorne. Not just for me, for everyone." Elliott walked toward the door, signaling the end of the conversation. "I'm not waging a war, Delaney. I'm just protecting my rights and my children's future. If you really cared about Naomi and the children, you would encourage her to accept reality and seek a fair, not vindictive, solution." After Caleb left, Elliott sat on the couch, feeling exhausted. The confrontation didn't bring the expected satisfaction. It just reinforced his conviction that he was handling the situation the right way. Calm, legal, principled, but firm. The first court hearing was more heated than Elliott expected. Naomi's attorney describes him as a controlling, resentful husband who seeks to punish his wife's infidelity through financial means. Mr. Thorne's transfer of virtually all of the family's savings immediately after discovering his wife's affair, opposing counsel asserted, was a clear act of retaliation designed to deprive my client of his rightful share of the property. Elliott's attorney, Diane, calmly countered, "My client's actions were completely legal and consistent with the family's long-term financial planning. The fact that these funds were transferred to a trust fund dedicated to the education of his children just shows that he prioritized the well-being of his children over personal vengeance." The judge, an older woman, watched both sides. "Where are those funds now? Who controls them?" "The funds are held in a legal trust," Diane explains, "and can only be used when the children are actually enrolled in an institution of higher education and are paid directly to the school. Neither Elliott nor Naomi can use that money for other purposes." That answer seemed to satisfy the judge. "What is the position of the parties regarding custody?" "We want to establish joint custody," Elliott's attorney said. "The children are old enough to express their wishes, and we want the court to consider their voices." Naomi's attorney quickly intervened. "My client is the primary caretaker of the children and always has been. Mr. Thorne travels a lot and is rarely involved in day-to-day parenting. We ask that primary custody be given to Naomi." Elliott felt a surge of anger when he heard these comments. He may not be a perfect father, but he has always tried his best to be involved in his children's lives, balancing work and family duties. It would be unfair to characterize him as an absentee father. The judge carefully reviewed the materials submitted by the parties. "Considering the ages of the kids, 16 and 14, I tend to value their opinions. The tribunal will arrange individual meetings with them to assess their situation and wishes. In the meantime, the temporary joint custody arrangement will remain in effect." As he leaves the courtroom, Elliott notices that Naomi looks tired and tense. Caleb waits in the back, trying to keep a low profile but clearly uncomfortable. Elliott suddenly realizes that the divorce may have hurt Naomi more than he thought. Even though she started it, the consequences are affecting every aspect of her life. "Elliott," Naomi called to him from the parking lot. "Can we talk?" "Talk separately." Elliott hesitated, but agreed. They walked to a quiet corner, out of sight of the lawyer and Caleb. "Is all this really necessary?" Naomi asked, a note of exhaustion in her voice. "This public humiliation, financial restrictions, leaving kids caught in the middle?" "I didn't put the kids in the middle," Elliott countered. "It was your decision that led to this. I'm just protecting myself and my kids. By destroying Caleb's career? By embarrassing me in front of my friends and neighbors. I just shared the facts, Naomi. If the truth embarrasses you, that's not my problem." Naomi took a deep breath and seemed to be trying to control her emotions. I made a mistake, Elliott. I shouldn't have ended our marriage that way. But you're overreacting. It's not just about you and me. It's about the future and stability of the children. Elliott felt a flicker of faltering, but then remembered the message from that Instagram group, the way Caleb had looked in his clothes in his home, and the pain of his children being forced to keep this terrible secret. We can address this rationally, he said eventually, but I will not give up the protections of my children's education fund or apologize for revealing the truth. If you want a fair settlement, have your lawyer talk to Diane. Don't pass the word through Caleb. Naomi nodded, a flicker of relief on her face. What about Trevor and Megan? They hardly talk to me these days. Give them time, Elliott suggested, his tone softening. They're adjusting to this new reality. Don't force them to accept Caleb. Let them go at their own pace. As he left Naomi, Elliott felt a strange sense of calm. Maybe they can finally find a way to coexist, if not as a couple, at least as parents raising their children together. Life gradually found a new rhythm as the divorce proceedings progressed. Elliott rents a larger apartment with plenty of room for the kids to stay over occasionally. Trevor came almost every weekend, and Megan began to split her time more evenly between the two families. On the work front, Elliott's career took a turn for the better. The success of the Evans Bridge project earned him recognition from the firm, and he was promoted to senior partner with a significant salary increase. This new role meant more responsibility, but also gave him more flexibility to balance work and family time. Naomi's situation is more complicated. With Caleb's career in trouble, their relationship begins to show signs of stress. Elliott learns through the children that arguments between Caleb and Naomi are becoming more frequent, centering around financial issues and future plans. One night, Trevor and Megan come over to Elliott's apartment for dinner. They seemed unusually quiet, as if they had something on their minds. What's wrong? Elliott asked as she prepared the pasta. Trevor and Megan exchanged a look. Mom and Caleb broke up, Megan finally said, her voice low. And yesterday, he moved out. Elliott stopped what he was doing and looked at the children in surprise. What happened? They've been arguing, Trevor explains, about money, about the future. Caleb wants to move to Toronto and start over, but Mom doesn't want us to transfer or move away from you. The final straw was when Caleb suggested selling the house. Mom refused. They had a big fight, and then he left. Elliott doesn't know what to say. On the one hand, he should be happy for Naomi to be rid of Caleb. On the other hand, he knows how hard it must be for her. Is Mom okay? He asked cautiously. She's been crying, Megan admitted, tears glistening in her eyes, saying she's screwed everything up. I've never seen her like this. Elliott sighed, put down his cookware, and sat down next to the kids. Listen, no matter what happens, your mom loves you guys. We all make mistakes, and sometimes it takes going through pain to learn a better way. But it's all because of her, Trevor noted, anger in his voice. If she hadn't cheated on us, we'd still be a family. It's not that simple, Elliott tries to explain. Even though it goes against his inner feelings, marriage is complicated. Your mom and I have had problems for a long time, and the cheating is just a symptom, not the root cause. Megan cried. I just wish things could go back to the way they were. Elliott hugged his daughter and felt a pang of guilt. His plan for revenge succeeds, but at what cost? Broken homes, wounded children, an ex-wife in a depression. Is this really the outcome he wanted? After dinner, while the kids were busy with their respective activities, Elliott dialed Naomi's number. I just heard about Caleb, he said directly. Are you okay? There was silence on the other end of the line for a split second. Why do you care? Naomi eventually replied, her voice husky. Isn't that what you want? My life falling apart, like yours? No, Elliott said honestly. I never wanted you to be miserable, Naomi. I'm just trying to protect myself and my kids. Liar, Naomi whispered, but the tone lacked any real hostility and was more tired. You planned everything. Media reports, investigations, everything against Caleb. You want him finished. I'm just sharing the known facts, Elliott insisted. And if there are problems with his business practices, it's his own fault. Anyway, Naomi said with a hint of bitter triumph in her voice, you won. He's gone and I have nothing. Satisfied? Elliott thought for a moment. It's not about winning or losing, Naomi. Regarding our marriage, we both lost. But right now, we need to figure out how to move forward for the sake of the kids. For the children, Naomi repeated, with a hint of mockery in her tone. That's the excuse you've been using, isn't it? But I know the truth. You wanted to punish me, and you succeeded. Congratulations. After hanging up, Elliott felt an emptiness. It wasn't the ending he wanted, but what other outcome could there be? The consequences of some behaviors cannot be avoided, no matter how cruel. The weekend after the divorce was finalized and official, Elliott took Trevor and Megan to a lake house near their hometown. He needed some time with his kids, away from the city and the stress of the last few months. The cottage is simple and cozy, surrounded by lush forest, providing a perfect getaway. On the first day, they boated, fished, and spent the evening roasting marshmallows around the campfire. The next morning, rain gently pounded on the roof, creating a perfect environment for indoor activities. I have an idea, Elliott suggested. Let's write down some of the things we've learned over the past few months and share them. The children showed unexpected enthusiasm for the offer. They sat by the fireplace, each thinking about what to write. Trevor starts first. I've learned that people aren't always what they appear to be, he reads. And sometimes the people you think are closest to you will let you down, and the people you don't think you know may stand up for you. Megan nodded in agreement and then shared her thoughts. I've learned that sometimes things don't go the way you expect them to, but that doesn't mean it's over. This is just a new beginning. Elliott was touched by the children's intelligence. Despite all they have been through, they have shown amazing resilience and growth. My turn came, he said, taking a deep breath. And I learned that sometimes, when you focus on punishing those who hurt you, you end up hurting those you love, too. Revenge may feel good, but it rarely brings true peace. The room fell into a contemplative silence, the only sounds being the raindrops tapping on the window and the crackling of burning wood in the fireplace. Do you regret it? Trevor suddenly asked. What you did to Mom and Caleb? Elliott thought for a moment. I have no regrets about protecting my rights and yours, but I regret how bitter and public things have become. If I could do it all over again, I'd probably choose a more peaceful path. Mom seemed really sorry, Megan said softly. She cried before we left yesterday and said she wished she could do it all over again. Elliott didn't respond, but the words resonated in his mind. He also wishes he could do it all over again, make different choices, pay more attention to his relationship with Naomi, and fix problems before they become irreparable. Upon returning to Ottawa, Elliott finds a letter under the door of his apartment. The envelope was unmarked, but inside was Naomi's familiar handwriting. Elliott, the letter reads, I am writing this letter because there are things I need to say, but I am not sure I have the courage to say them face to face. First, I want to apologize for my betrayal. No excuse can explain my behavior. I failed you. I failed the kids. I failed the family we built together. I should have been honest about our problems instead of seeking outside comfort. Secondly, I want you to know that while I don't agree with the way you take revenge, I understand why you do it. If the roles were reversed, I might have done something worse. Finally, about the kids. They need both of us, now more than ever. Whatever happens between us, we have to find ways for them to coexist. I don't expect forgiveness or for us to go back to the way things were. But maybe, in time, we can find a way to peacefully coexist, at least as parents to Trevor and Megan. Naomi. Elliott read the letter and felt a wave of mixed emotions. Anger, hurt, betrayal. These feelings are still there, but their power seems to have diminished. In its place is a weary acceptance and a vague hope for the future. He recalled his own words to his children at the lake house. Revenge may feel good, but it rarely brings true peace. Maybe it's time to let go of revenge and start seeking peace. Elliott picked up his cell phone and sent Naomi a short message. Got your letter. Maybe it's time to talk about long-term arrangements for kids. See you at the cafe next week. A few minutes later, she replied, Okay, thanks. A simple exchange, but for them it was a start. Not to fix a broken relationship, but to build a new one, based on shared responsibility and love for their children. Elliott went to the window and looked at the Ottawa skyline. The sun was sinking in the west, gilding the city with a golden color. Endings and beginnings, he thought. Every ending contains the seed of a new beginning. He doesn't know what the future holds, but he knows one thing. The cycle of revenge ends here. It was time to start healing, not only for himself, but for Trevor and Megan, and even for Naomi. Because in the end, the price of betrayal is too high for everyone involved. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.